Your unmanaged wilderness, she declared, her voice a grating symphony of entitlement that scraped against the peaceful birdsong, is a direct violation of Section 12, subsection C of the Whispering Pines Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. It constitutes a fire hazard and an eyesore. I stood on my own land, soil my great-grandfather had cleared and farmed, and listened to this woman lecture me about regulations that had no more jurisdiction here than the laws of Mars. Her name, I would later learn, was Karen Miller. She was ample, stuffed into a fluorescent pink polo shirt bearing a vaguely fascistic logo of a pine tree constrained within a perfect circle. She had driven her golf cart, the chosen chariot of the petty tyrant, directly onto the edge of my property, its tires crushing a patch of wild violets. "Ma'am," I said, my voice deliberately calm and low, a counterpoint to her shrill frequency. "This is private property. It is not, nor has it ever been, part of Whispering Pines." She produced a thin, triumphant smile, the kind that suggested she had anticipated this feeble parry and had a devastating riposte prepared. The new survey commissioned by the Homeowners Association clearly delineates the creek bed and a 50-foot easement on either side as common area for water management and beautification. Your thicket falls within that easement. We will be sending a landscaping crew to clear it next week. You will, of course, be billed for the service. I looked past her, toward the sterile rows of identical beige houses that constituted the estates at Whispering Pines, a subdivision that had metastasized on the land bordering my 20 acres of timber. My family had owned this tract for over a century. The spring-fed creek she was attempting to commandeer had been the reason my great-grandfather settled here. It was the lifeblood of this small forest, and the thought of a landscaping crew attacking it with chainsaws and weed whackers sent a cold, dark spike of anger through me. I had retired here for peace. 30 years as a colonel in the Army Corps of Engineers, managing billion-dollar infrastructure projects in places where a miscalculation could get people killed, had earned me a quiet life. I wanted to spend my days maintaining the old stone walls, listening to the whisper of the wind through the pines that gave the encroaching subdivision its stolen name, and enjoying the solitude I had so richly deserved. This woman, this self-appointed field marshal of lawn maintenance, was a declaration of war I had not sought. "There is no easement," I stated. It was not a debate. It was a fact. "My property line is marked by the iron survey pins set in 1923, and it was reconfirmed when this subdivision was platted. You are currently trespassing." Her face flushed a shade darker than her polo shirt. "We will see what our lawyers have to say about that. You can't just have a private jungle next to our premium homes. It lowers property values. There could be snakes." She punctuated this last, dire warning with a jab of her finger toward my trees. Then, with a final huff of indignation, she wrenched the steering tiller of her golf cart, spun it around in a tight, destructive circle that tore a muddy scar in the earth, and zipped away toward her beige kingdom. I stood there for a long time, the quiet rushing back in to fill the space her voice had occupied. The scent of crushed violets and churned soil rose from the ground. The campaign had begun. She had fired the first shot. And in doing so, she had made a catastrophic error. She had mistaken a quiet man for a weak one. The official declaration of war arrived 3 days later, delivered by a mailman who seemed vaguely apologetic as he handed over the certified letter. It came in a thick, cream-colored envelope, the kind of paper designed to convey importance and intimidation through sheer weight. In the top left corner, the Whispering Pines logo was embossed, its constrained pine tree looking more smug and self-satisfied than I remembered. I took it inside to my study, the room my grandfather had used to manage the timber sales that put my father through college. The scent of old books and lemon oil polish hung in the air, a fragrance of stability and reason. I slit the envelope open with a letter opener shaped like a cavalry sword, a memento from my time at the Command and General Staff College. The letter was a masterpiece of bureaucratic aggression. Printed on the same heavy bond paper as the envelope, it was titled, "Final Notice of Violation and Intent to Levy Fines." It cited a half-dozen different sections of their CC and Rs, none of which applied to me or my land. It accused me of harboring vermin, creating a public nuisance, failing to maintain landscaping to community standards, and improper watercourse management. The list of transgressions was as long as it was fictional. The final paragraph was the payload. It informed me that a fine of $100 per day was being assessed against my property, retroactive to the date of Karen Miller's initial inspection. Furthermore, if I did not contract a board-approved vendor to clear the 50-foot common area easement within 14 days, the HOA would do so on my behalf and place a lien on my property for the cost, which they estimated at a shockingly precise $7,450. I read the letter twice. A slow, dangerous calm settled over me, the same feeling I'd had before launching a complex bridging operation over a hostile river. The anger was still there, a cold, dense star in my chest. But it was now a tool, not a distraction. Emotion was a liability in a campaign. This was a logistical problem, an enemy objective to be neutralized through superior planning, intelligence, and execution. Karen Miller had escalated from a verbal skirmish to a paper assault. She believed her thick stationery and her made-up rules gave her power. She was wrong. She had just provided me with my first piece of enemy intelligence. I walked over to my bookshelf, past the volumes on civil engineering and military history, and pulled out a new 3-inch D-ring binder. It was black, severe, and professional. From my desk, I took a label maker and carefully typed out a title: Operation Timber Shield. I printed the label and affixed it squarely to the spine of the binder. I 3-hole punched Karen Miller's pompous letter and clipped it into the first page protector. This was Exhibit A, the opening salvo of the opposition. My field manual for the coming conflict was now officially open. My retirement was on hold. The war for Whispering Pines had a name. The first phase of any campaign is reconnaissance. You do not engage the enemy until you know the terrain, their strength, their weaknesses, and the rules of engagement. My enemy had foolishly handed me their rulebook, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions she kept referencing. A trip to the HOA's surprisingly amateurish website, and a few clicks later, I had a PDF of the entire document. I spent the next 2 days in my study with a pot of black coffee and a highlighter. I read the CC and RS from cover to cover, not as a homeowner, but as a hostile intelligence analyst. The document was exactly what I expected. A poorly written tapestry of boilerplate legal jargon, petty aesthetic mandates, and broad, sweeping grants of power to the board. It dictated the acceptable shades of beige for siding, the maximum height of grass, the prohibition of garden gnomes, and the precise angle at which driveway basketball hoops must be stored when not in use. But within its pages of suburban tyranny, I found what I was looking for. I found its weaknesses. The document, for all its bluster, clearly defined the boundaries of the Whispering Pines subdivision. It referenced the official county plat map, document number 74B, filed in 2005. That map was the legal foundation upon which their entire world was built. and my land was not on it. The CC&Rs could no more govern my property than they could the surface of the moon. Her claim rested entirely on the existence of a new survey that supposedly created an easement. This was the linchpin of her entire strategy. It was also, I suspected, a complete fabrication. An easement is a legal conveyance of property rights. It requires deeds, filings, and the consent of the property owner. I had certainly never consented to such a thing. The next morning, I drove to the county courthouse, a stately old building of granite and marble that smelled of floor wax and old paper. The county clerk's office was a quiet, dusty archive of every land transaction, every survey, every legal right-of-way recorded for the last 200 years. This was the ultimate source of truth, the ground truth. I requested the plat map for the Whispering Pines subdivision, document 74B. The clerk, a woman with a kind, tired face, returned with a massive, rolled-up sheet of drafting linen. We spread it out on a large wooden table, and I felt a surge of grim satisfaction. The map was a masterpiece of professional surveying. Every line was precise, every angle calculated, every boundary marker meticulously noted. And there, along the entire western edge of the subdivision, was a thick, clear line labeled Property of John R. Sterling, Senior Trust. My property. The map didn't just show that my land was separate. It used my land as the fundamental boundary for their own. There was no easement, not a single dotted line, not a single note in the surveyor's legend. Nothing. To be certain, I had the clerk search for any easements filed against my property since the plat was recorded. The search took 15 minutes. The result was exactly as I expected. 0. I paid for 3 certified copies of the plat map. They were my heavy artillery. My next stop was to identify a higher authority. Karen Miller had created her own little fiefdom, but even petty tyrants are subject to the law. Her threats involved clearing trees and dredging a creek. That brought her into a different jurisdiction. Back in my study, I opened a new front in my research. The State Department of Environmental Protection. My spring-fed creek was a natural waterway. It flowed into the subdivision's retention pond, and from there into a tributary of the Wakiva River. It was part of a protected watershed. I found the relevant statutes easily enough. Any alteration of a natural waterway, including dredging, clearing of banks, or diversion, required a state permit. The process was arduous, expensive, and required extensive environmental impact studies. Doing so without a permit carried heavy fines and potential criminal charges. I placed a call to the regional DEP office. I was routed through a typically bureaucratic phone tree until I finally reached a man named Mr. Henderson in the Watershed Management Division. He sounded bored, his voice monotone, clearly weary from a career of dealing with public complaints. I calmly and methodically laid out the situation. I identified myself, my property, and the adjacent subdivision. I explained the nature of the creek. Then I recounted the HOA president's threat to send a crew to clear the easement and dredge the waterway. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. She said what? Mr. Henderson's voice was no longer bored. It was sharp, focused, and laced with a new and wonderful energy. I repeated Karen's threat, quoting her directly. I could hear the sound of furious typing in the background. "Sir," he said, his tone now one of a hunter who has just spotted prize game. "What is this woman's name? And the name of the HOA?" I gave him the information. He informed me that what she was proposing was a serious violation of at least 3 state environmental statutes. He took my contact information. gave me a case file number, and assured me that the DEP would be sending a strongly worded letter of advisement to the Whispering Pines HOA, reminding them of their legal obligations and the severe penalties for non-compliance. I thanked him for his time. He thanked me for the report. We were, in that moment, battlefield allies. I carefully documented the call, the time, his name, and the case number, and filed the notes in my binder. Operation Timber Shield now had air support. The final piece of reconnaissance was to gauge the sentiment of the local populace. A tyrant's power base is often shallower than it appears. I needed to know if Karen Miller was a beloved leader or a despised despot. I suspected the latter. My first foray into enemy territory was a simple walk through the subdivision the next afternoon. The neighborhood was a monument to conformity. Every lawn was a perfect green carpet, every shrub trimmed into a neat, unnatural sphere. It was quiet, almost unnervingly so. I saw my first target of opportunity near the community mailboxes. An elderly woman was struggling to retrieve a package from her box. I recognized her as Mrs. Gable from the name on the mailbox. I walked over and offered to help. "Oh, thank you, dear," she said, her voice frail. "My arthritis is acting up today." I easily worked the package free and handed it to her. We exchanged pleasantries, and then I casually mentioned that I was her neighbor from the timber property to the west. Her eyes widened slightly. "Oh," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You're the one she's been mailing about." "Mailing about?" I asked, feigning ignorance. "Karen Miller, the HOA president. She sent an email blast to the whole neighborhood. Something about an ongoing enforcement action against an uncooperative landowner whose blighted property is lowering our values. I thought it was all a bit much. The seeds of a rebellion. I had my opening. "She seems to take her job very seriously," I said, my tone neutral. Mrs. Gable let out a short, bitter laugh. "She takes her power seriously. Last month, she fined me $200 because my bird feeder was attracting undesirable avian elements. I've had that feeder for 20 years. I listened patiently as she recounted a litany of petty abuses, of fines for holiday decorations left up 2 days too long, of warnings for trash cans not retrieved within an hour of pickup. She was afraid of Karen, but she was also angry. I told her I was sorry she had to deal with that, and that if she ever needed anything, she knew where I lived. I gave her a warm smile and continued my walk, leaving her with the distinct impression that she had found a sympathetic ear. Over the next few days, I found more like her. The Martinez family, a young couple with 2 small children, were being fined weekly because their son's portable basketball hoop was, according to Karen, aesthetically displeasing. Mr. Martinez told me he was tired of fighting, tired of the constant nasty emails and registered letters. He just paid the fines to make it stop. I documented every story. I collected names, dates, and the specific nature of the alleged violations. The binder grew thicker. It was no longer just about my land. It was becoming a dossier on a pattern of systematic abuse and intimidation. I was not just defending my property. I was now preparing to liberate an occupied territory. The intelligence gathering phase was complete. I had the law, the facts, and the budding support of a local insurgency. It was time to bring in professional reinforcements. It was time to hire a lawyer. I did not search for just any lawyer. I needed a specific type of operative, someone who understood the nature of the conflict and would appreciate the methodical groundwork I had already laid. I searched for local law firms specializing in property law and HOA disputes. and cross-referenced them with a database of veteran-owned businesses. The search yielded a name: David Chen, Esquire. The firm's website was professional and understated. His biography was what sold me. Major United States Army JAG Corps, retired. He had spent 20 years advising commanders on the laws of war, contracts, and administrative law. He spoke my language. I scheduled a consultation. His office was in a modest but well-appointed building downtown. It was organized, efficient, and devoid of unnecessary clutter. David Chen himself was a man who radiated a quiet, intense competence. He was sharp, fit, with eyes that missed nothing. He greeted me with a firm handshake and a nod of professional respect. "Colonel Sterling," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Pleasure to meet you. Your call was intriguing." "Major Chen," I replied, taking the seat. "Thank you for seeing me on short notice." We exchanged a brief, unspoken acknowledgement of our shared background. The formalities were observed. The chain of command, though no longer applicable, was respected. "So," he began, leaning forward, all business. "Tell me about your situation with the Whispering Pines HOA." Instead of launching into a long, emotional story, I simply placed the 3-inch black binder on his polished mahogany desk. The label, Operation Timber Shield, was facing him. He looked at the binder, then back at me. A flicker of something, amusement, recognition, perhaps both, crossed his face. He opened it. For the next 20 minutes, he said nothing. He simply turned the pages, his focus absolute. He examined the certified letter from Karen, my notes on the CC and RS with highlighted sections, the certified copies of the county plat map, my detailed log of the call with the DEP official, including the case number, and my compiled list of other residents' grievances. When he finally looked up, he had a slow, dangerous smile on his face. It was the smile of a predator who has been presented with a particularly helpless and foolish prey. "Colonel," he said, his voice imbued with a newfound reverence, "this is not a file. This is a kill box. You've done 90% of my job for me." "I believe in thorough preparation, Major," I said. "Clearly," he replied, closing the binder. "So, this Karen Miller. She's asserted authority where she has none, based on a non-existent survey and a fabricated easement. She has threatened to trespass and cause criminal damage to your property, which happens to be part of a state-protected watershed. In the process, she has committed mail fraud by using the Postal Service to transmit threats and attempt to collect on a fraudulent debt. And as a bonus, she's running a racketeering operation against the other residents through the systematic abuse of the fine levying process. Is that a fair summary?" "That is an excellent summary." "Good," he said, his smile widening. "I love cases like this. The arrogance is a beautiful thing to behold. It makes them sloppy." He then laid out the legal counter-salvo. It was a 2-phase operation, exactly as I had hoped. Phase 1 was a cease and desist letter. But not just any letter. David described it as a shock and awe campaign delivered via FedEx. "We won't just send it to the HOA's mailing address," he explained, already warming to the task. "We'll send a copy to her personal address, and one to each member of her board of directors, personally. We want to isolate her. We want her sycophants to feel the heat directly. We want their spouses asking them what the hell they've gotten themselves into." The letter itself would be a masterpiece of legal lethality. It would cite the specific state statutes she was threatening to violate. It would reference the active DEP case file by number. It would include a copy of the county plat map, highlighting the undeniable property line. It would formally demand the immediate rescission of all fines and a written apology. And it would put her, and the board members individually, on notice that any attempt to trespass on my property would result in immediate legal action, seeking both compensatory and punitive damages against them personally, not just the HOA. "We're not just telling her to stop," David concluded, steepling his fingers. "We're showing her the precise legal and financial ruin she's marching toward. We're giving her an off-ramp, a chance to retreat with some dignity." "And if she doesn't take it?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. David Chen leaned back in his chair. "Then we move to Phase 2. And Phase 2 is a lawsuit that will dissolve their board, put them into receivership, and make you the most popular man in that entire subdivision. But my bet is on her doubling down. People like this can't admit they're wrong. Their ego is too fragile. She'll walk right into the trap." I left his office feeling 10 feet tall. I had transitioned from a solitary defender to the commander of a combined arms force. I had legal counsel. I had superior intelligence. I had the moral high ground. And I had an enemy who was, by all accounts, charging headlong and blindfolded toward a minefield of her own making. The letter went out the next day. The fuse was lit. The response to David's legal broadside was not the retreat we had offered, but the belligerent escalation we had predicted. For a week, there was only silence, a tense, watchful quiet. I imagined the letter landing on the doormats of the board members, the worried phone calls, the panicked meetings. I imagined Karen Miller, her face contorted in rage, reading the cold, hard legal facts that dismantled her entire premise. Her next move was not a letter from a lawyer, but a notice posted on the community bulletin board and sent out in another email blast. It announced a special executive hearing of the Architectural Review Committee to be held in 2 weeks. The sole item on the agenda was listed as Review of Non-Compliant Property, Lot 0, Sterling Trust. She was staging a show trial. It was a classic tactic of a petty dictator. Create a public spectacle to assert dominance and humiliate the opposition. She intended to use the form of a committee she controlled to legitimize her illegal actions. David and I had a brief phone call. His advice was simple. "Let her," he said, a note of amusement in his voice. "Let her build the stage. Let her assemble the audience. She's creating the perfect venue for her own public immolation. We'll attend, but we won't participate in her sham hearing. We'll simply be observers." But Karen Miller was impatient. 2 weeks was too long to wait to reassert her authority. Her ego, bruised by David's letter, demanded immediate satisfaction. And so, she made her most critical, most catastrophic blunder. It happened on a Tuesday morning. I was in my workshop, restoring an old piece of furniture, when I heard the unmistakable sound of a heavy diesel engine and the grinding rumble of machinery coming from the edge of my property. I put down my tools and walked outside. Parked on the manicured grass of the HOA common area, right at my property line, was a large truck with a wood chipper in tow. 2 men in dirty jeans and t-shirts were unloading chainsaws and heavy-duty brush cutters. And standing beside them, pointing emphatically toward my trees, was Karen Miller. She was wearing an aggressive canary-yellow blazer, a sort of field marshal's uniform for her grand offensive. I felt that cold, dangerous calm settle over me once more. I went back inside, retrieved 2 items from my study, a copy of the certified plat map and my smartphone, and walked calmly toward the unfolding scene. As I approached, I could hear her instructing the men. "Start with that undergrowth there, and then work your way back about 50 feet. Clear it all out. Everything. The men looked uneasy. They were clearly day laborers, not professional arborists. They glanced from her to my clearly marked and posted property line, then back again. "Ma'am," one of them said, scratching the back of his neck. "Are you sure this is your land? There's no trespassing signs right there." "It is a common area easement," she snapped, her voice sharp with impatience. "I am the president of the Homeowners Association. I am authorizing you to proceed. Now get to work." That was my cue. I started recording on my phone before I was even in earshot, making sure to capture the truck, the men, and Karen's imperious gesturing. "Good morning," I said, my voice level and calm as I walked up to the group. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Karen spun around. A look of triumphant fury flashed across her face when she saw me. "There's no misunderstanding, Mr. Sterling. This is the HOA's property, and we are cleaning up your mess, just like we said we would." I ignored her completely and addressed the two workmen directly. "Gentlemen," I said, holding up the certified plat map so they could see it clearly. "My name is John Sterling. This document is the official county survey. This line right here," I traced it with my finger, "is my property line. As you can see, there is no easement. The land you are about to clear is my private property. This woman has no authority here." They stared at the map, their eyes wide. They were not lawyers, but they understood a map. They understood a property line. I continued, my tone still conversational. "I want you to know that I am currently recording this entire interaction. If you start those chainsaws and step onto my land, I will not only sue your employer for trespassing and damages, but I will also file criminal charges against each of you personally for destruction of property. I'm sure you're just trying to do a day's work, and I don't want to see you get into that kind of trouble." I then looked directly at Karen. She, on the other hand, is willfully and knowingly attempting to hire you to commit a crime. That's called conspiracy. The color drained from Karen's face. She opened her mouth to screech something, but I cut her off, turning my attention back to the workers. The truck rumbled back to life, and they drove away, leaving Karen Miller standing alone on the grass, her canary yellow blazer looking ridiculous in the morning sun. She stared at me, her face a mask of pure, undiluted hatred. She had been publicly thwarted and humiliated. It was a fatal blow to her aura of untouchable authority. I stopped recording. I had it all. The proof of her attempted trespass, her illegal orders, her utter disregard for the law. It was perfect. Exhibit B for Operation Timber Shield. The final piece of the puzzle fell into my lap 2 days later. I received a call from a blocked number. The man on the other end spoke in a low, nervous whisper. "Is this Colonel Sterling?" he asked. "It is. My name is Arthur Pinter. I'm the treasurer of the Whispering Pines, HOA." His voice was trembling. "I saw what happened with the tree guys. I got a copy of your lawyer's letter. I can't do this anymore. She's out of control." I listened as a torrent of panicked confession poured out of him. He told me Karen ruled the board through fear, that she alone controlled the HOA's finances, and that she was using the association's bank accounts like her own personal slush fund. The fines she collected from residents like Mrs. Gable and the Martinezes didn't go into the general operating fund. They went into a separate account labeled Presidential Contingency Fund. The money for the tree-cutting crew had come from that account. She's paying her own cousin's landscaping company for no-bid contracts to put down pine straw at the entrance twice a month for 5 times the going rate, he whispered frantically. She used the beautification fund to pay for the new patio furniture at her own house. It's all there, I have the records, the bank statements, the invoices. I can't go to the police. She'll destroy me, but I can't let it go on. Arthur was the inside source I hadn't dared hope for. He was terrified, but his conscience had finally won. "What do you need, Arthur?" I asked him, my voice calm and reassuring. "Meet me in an hour. The parking lot of the library. I'll have a flash drive for you. Please just don't tell her it was me." An hour later, a trembling hand passed me a small USB drive in a quiet corner of the library parking lot. I drove home, my heart beating a steady, rhythmic tattoo of impending victory. I plugged the drive into my computer. It was all there: scanned bank statements, inflated invoices from Miller Landscaping, credit card receipts from high-end patio furniture stores, a clear, undeniable, and beautifully documented trail of embezzlement, self-dealing, and fraud. This was the kill shot. Karen Miller's show trial was still a week away. It was no longer her stage. It was mine. The night of the special executive hearing arrived. The chosen venue was the community clubhouse, a sterile, soulless room with beige walls, fluorescent lighting, and uncomfortable folding chairs. The air was thick with a mixture of cheap air freshener and nervous tension. Karen had clearly expected a small, intimidated audience for my public flogging. What she got was something else entirely. The room was packed. Word had spread. Mrs. Gable had spoken to her friends. The Martinezes had talked to other young families. My quiet reconnaissance had cultivated a network of discontent, and they had all turned out. They filled every chair and stood along the back wall, a silent, watchful crowd. I saw Arthur Pinter near the back, looking pale and trying to make himself as small as possible. I arrived with David Chen at my side. I was carrying a briefcase containing my binder and a laptop. David carried a legal pad and a look of serene confidence. We took seats in the front row. Our presence, calm and professional, seemed to suck the oxygen out of Karen's pre-planned performance. She sat at a long folding table at the front of the room, flanked by two other board members who looked deeply uncomfortable. Karen, however, was in her element. She wore a severe navy blue blazer with padded shoulders, her armor for the battle. She banged a small, toy-like gavel on the table. "This special hearing of the Architectural Review Committee is now in session," she announced, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. "The sole agenda item is the continued and flagrant violation of community standards by the adjacent property owner, John Sterling." She launched into a prepared speech, a rambling tirade filled with lies and exaggerations. She painted me as a hostile recluse, a menace to the community. She spoke of blight, vermin, and plummeting property values. She held up a copy of my lawyer's letter, dismissing it as a frivolous and intimidating tactic. She concluded by brandishing a blurry photograph of the trees along my property line. "This board has been more than patient," she declared, her voice rising with manufactured indignation. "Therefore, the committee is proposing a special assessment of $15,000 levied against every homeowner in Whispering Pines to fund the necessary legal action and land clearing services to resolve this threat to our community once and for all." It was a bold, foolish move. She was trying to make the fight so expensive for the community that they would turn on me to make it stop. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. People were not looking at me with anger. They were looking at her with disbelief. They were being asked to pay for her personal vendetta. She had just opened the door for us. David Chen stood up slowly. "Madam President," he said, his voice calm but carrying easily through the room. "My client will not be participating in this sham hearing. However, he has prepared a brief presentation for the homeowners of Whispering Pines to provide them with the actual facts of this situation. I trust you have no objection to the truth? Karen was cornered. To refuse would be to admit she was hiding something. Fine, she spat. But be brief. That was all the permission I needed. I walked to the front of the room, set up my laptop, and connected it to the projector they had intended to use for their own presentation. The first image that flashed onto the screen behind Karen was the high-resolution, certified copy of the county plat map. Good evening, I began, addressing the crowd, not the board. My name is John Sterling. For those of you who don't know me, I own the 20 acres of timberland that borders your community. This document behind me is the official plat map for the Whispering Pines subdivision, on file at the county courthouse. As you can see quite clearly, my property is, and always has been, legally separate. The common area easement that Mr. Miller has been referencing simply does not exist. It is a legal fiction she created to try and exert authority where she has none. I clicked to the next slide. It was a screenshot of the relevant section of the Florida statutes concerning the protection of natural waterways, with the key phrases highlighted in yellow. Furthermore, I continued, the creek she has repeatedly threatened to have cleared is part of a state-protected watershed. Any attempt to alter it without extensive permitting from the Department of Environmental Protection is a criminal offense. The DEP is aware of this situation and has an active case file open. This is the case number. I let that sink in. The murmuring in the crowd grew louder. I saw people exchanging shocked glances. Mr. Miller did not just threaten to do this, I said, my voice hardening slightly. She acted on it. The next slide was the video I had taken on my phone. I hit play. The room watched in stunned silence as the scene unfolded on the screen. Karen Miller, in her canary yellow blazer, illegally ordering the work crew to trespass and destroy my property. They heard her dismiss the workers' concerns. They heard my calm explanation of the law, and they watched as the workers, realizing they were being hired to commit a crime, packed up and abandoned her. When the video ended, the room was silent. Karen's face was ashen. Her two board members looked like they wanted the floor to swallow them whole. This entire campaign against me, the threatening letters, the illegal work crews, I said, my voice low and steady, has been built on a foundation of lies, and I have to wonder why. What is the real motivation? I clicked to the next slide. It was the first page of a bank statement for an account titled Whispering Pines HOA, Presidential Contingency Fund. I believe this is the reason. From the back of the room, a woman's voice, clear and strong, rang out. What is that? This, I said, is where your money is going. For the next 10 minutes, I walked them through the evidence from Arthur's flash drive. I showed them the inflated invoices from Miller Landscaping, totaling over $20,000 in the last year alone. I showed them the public record search revealing the owner of that company was Karen Miller's cousin. I showed them the credit card statement, paid from the beautification fund, with a $4,000 charge for portside patio furnishings. I then put up a photo, taken from a public real estate listing, of Karen Miller's own backyard, featuring a brand new high-end set of patio furniture. A wave of outrage washed through the room. The murmurs became angry shouts. "That's fraud," someone yelled. "She's stealing from us," another cried out. I held up a hand for silence. The $15,000 special assessment she just proposed was not to fight me, I said, delivering the final blow. It was to replenish the funds she has been embezzling for her own personal gain. The room erupted, Karen Miller sat frozen in her chair, her face a grotesque mask of shock and fury. She was exposed, her power stripped away in a matter of minutes by cold, hard, undeniable facts. David Chen stood up again. Given the evidence of financial malfeasance and gross misconduct presented here tonight, he announced in the ensuing chaos, I believe a motion is in order. Mr. Martinez, the young father I had spoken to, jumped to his feet. I move for a vote of no confidence and the immediate removal of Karen Miller and the entire board of directors. Mrs. Gable, the elderly woman with the bird feeder, stood up as well, her voice surprisingly strong. I second the motion, someone shouted. All in favor. The response was a deafening, unanimous roar of aye that shook the cheap clubhouse walls. It was the sound of a community liberating itself. The coup de grace was complete. Karen Miller stared out at the sea of angry faces, the faces of the people she had bullied and stolen from. Her reign was over. Without another word, she stumbled to her feet and fled the room, a disgraced tyrant escaping her own fallen palace. The revolution was successful. In the immediate aftermath of Karen's panicked flight, a strange and wonderful sense of order, not chaos, settled over the room. The anger that had boiled over just moments before transformed into a palpable wave of relief and purpose. David Chen, ever the professional, calmly stepped forward to guide the proceedings. According to your own bylaws, he announced, his voice cutting through the lingering buzz of excitement. In the event of a full board removal, an interim board can be elected by a majority vote of the homeowners present, to serve until a special election can be held. Hands shot up across the room. People who had been silenced by fear for years were now eager to participate, to rebuild. Mr. Martinez was nominated and elected as the interim president by a near-unanimous vote. Gable, to her own blushing surprise, was nominated and elected as secretary. A quiet accountant I hadn't met before, a man named Frank, was elected treasurer. He had a look of grim determination on his face, the look of a man eager to clean up a mess. The first act of the new interim board, proposed by Mr. Martinez just minutes after taking his seat at the front table, was a motion to void every fine levied by Karen Miller's board in the past 2 years. The motion passed with another thunderous aye. A collective weight seemed to lift from the shoulders of everyone in the room. It was more than just money. It was the erasure of years of petty humiliations. The second motion was to formally retain David Chen as the HOA's legal counsel, specifically to conduct a full forensic audit of the association's finances and to pursue all available legal and criminal remedies against Karen Miller and any complicit former board members for embezzlement and fraud. That motion, too, passed without a single dissenting voice. The third and final motion of the evening was proposed by Mrs. Gable. She stood, her voice trembling slightly with emotion, and proposed that the HOA issue a formal public apology to me for the harassment I had endured, and to enter into the official record that my property was, and forever would be, recognized as a separate and respected neighbor, not an adversary. The vote was a formality. I left the clubhouse that night not as an enemy of the community, but as something of a reluctant hero. People stopped me on the way out to shake my hand, to thank me. The Martinez's young son ran up and gave me a shy high five. The atmosphere had been fundamentally altered. The pall of fear that had hung over Whispering Pines was gone, replaced by the bright, clean air of community and justice. The weeks that followed saw swift and decisive change. The forensic audit uncovered the full extent of Karen's corruption, which was even worse than we had imagined. David Chen, acting on behalf of the HOA, filed a civil suit against her to recover the stolen funds. The local district attorney, presented with the mountain of evidence, convened a grand jury. Karen Miller was indicted on multiple felony counts of fraud and embezzlement. Her fall from power was as swift as it was total. She and her husband put their house up for sale in a desperate attempt to pay for lawyers and restitution, the for sale sign a final humiliating monument to her failed reign. The neighborhood itself began to heal. The oppressive uniformity started to relax. A few colorful garden gnomes appeared on lawns, tiny sentinels of a newfound freedom. Mr. Martinez proved to be a fair and reasonable leader, focused on transparency and actual community building, not petty enforcement. The nasty emails and threatening letters ceased entirely. One Saturday afternoon, the Martinez family came to my door. They brought with them a freshly baked apple pie. "We just wanted to thank you, Colonel," Mr. Martinez said, a genuine warmth in his eyes. "You didn't have to do what you did. You could have just fought for your own land. But you fought for all of us." We stood on my porch for a while, and I pointed out the different types of trees, the path the creek followed, the old stone wall my grandfather had built. For the first time, the boundary between my property and theirs felt less like a border and more like a friendly handshake between neighbors. It was a symbolic gesture of peace, a quiet armistice after a long campaign. That evening, I sat on my porch in my favorite rocking chair, a glass of bourbon in my hand. The sun was setting, casting long golden shafts of light through the ancient pines. The only sounds were the gentle murmur of the creek, the chirping of crickets, and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. It was the peace I had retired for, the peace I had fought to protect. On the small table beside me sat the black binder, Operation Timber Shield. It was thick now, filled with legal documents, evidence, and the story of a battle won. It had served its purpose. It was a tool of war, and the war was over. I picked it up, walked over to the stone fire pit in my yard, and placed the binder on the grate. I struck a match and touched it to the corner of the first page, Karen's original, arrogant letter. The paper curled, blackened, and caught flame. I watched as the fire consumed the evidence of the conflict, page by page. The legal letters, the financial statements, the notes from my reconnaissance, all of it turned to gray ash and drifted up into the twilight sky. It was a ceremonial destruction, a final demobilization. The Cincinnatus returning to his plow, the soldier returning to his farm. I had been called from my peace to fight a battle I did not want, against a tyrant I did not know. But through discipline, strategy, and the simple, unwavering power of the truth, order had been restored. The republic, or in this case, the subdivision, was safe. My land was safe. The quiet was mine again, deeper and more profound than before, because it was a peace that had been earned. It was a peace I had won.